This is Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program discussing the important crossroad of religion in life, produced by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC TV. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues throughout our area. Now, today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
Welcome to this special year-end edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Richard Thompson of Austin Metropolitan Ministries.
And I'm Sandy Wilder of Covenant United Methodist Church. And today we'll be co-hosting this review of 1995 highlights of Austin Faith Dialogue.
But first, let's look back in time even further, as we have opportunity on this 8th anniversary of the only ecumenical interfaith public affairs series. As we've, through Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC, we've been privileged to feature what has not been done in Central Texas before. Programs on faith traditions, on religion and the arts, on pastoral services, and on social issues from faith perspectives.
In this first of 4 segments, you'll find all 4 of these themes included. First, in the late 1980s, we taped a program on Austin Metropolitan Ministries itself. Next, in the 90s, we were privileged to visit with Bill Moyers when he was in town premiering his production of Amazing Grace. Soon thereafter, the pastoral and worship needs of the deaf community were brought to public attention. And finally, producer Roger Lotz will be shown on the program about cults as occasioned by the Branch Davidians. For this, we won a 1993 award from ACTV, which replays our broadcasts every week. Let's now view these 4 early years.
This is Austin Faith Dialogue, and I'm Barbara Holmes, a staff member at St. John's United Methodist Church and your host for today's program. Every week, the host tells you this religious public affairs program is brought to you by Austin Metropolitan Ministries. What is Austin Metropolitan Ministries? It is the opportunity for Christians, Jews, and Muslims to worship together in a community-wide Thanksgiving service. In the early summer of 1988, this interfaith organization was formed when the Austin Area Conference of Churches, Austin Metro Ministries, and representatives of the Jewish and Muslim community came together. By early 1989, the board of directors had secured an executive director, and today we'll look at this past year in review and hear about the future of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. So let's meet our guests who are joining us today on Austin Faith Dialogue. This is Patrick Flood, the executive director of Austin Metropolitan Ministries, and we're glad to have you with us. Gail Miller is serving as the vice president of the organization.
And people, I think, turn to it as though it was something that they'd already known, and that as though they were being, their memories, their inner memory was being refreshed so that they knew it. Ah, yes, I know that.
Well, you mentioned Judy Collins as the one who gave some public expression to that at that point in time, and you come back to her later and have her reflect on that.
What I've tried to do in the film, my colleague Ellen Lemanis, who produced and directed it, and I've tried to do is to tell the story through the people who've experienced the story. This is not a documentary with any narration. It's not what you usually see on television when you tune into a documentary. It's a self-telling story, in a sense, told by the people whose lives have been affected by the hymn, including the performers who sing it. Judy Collins, for example, told me that Amazing Grace saved her, and I won't use the actual term here, but we'll let the audience use its imaginations. It was the only song that she could get through when she was drunk. And she said that if she hadn't been able to sing Amazing Grace, that her career would have ended. But somehow, when she began to sing, the audience would join in, as you will see later in the film. The audience would join in, and a kind of community of kindred spirits would rise out of that relationship between the performer and the singer, like invisible hands, and carry her across the pain of her alcoholism and the dysfunction of her alcoholism, and she'd get through it, and then she was all right.
Hearing about the work of the church in Austin in relationship to the deaf, David, could you just share with us about your church and what other churches in town are providing these services with the deaf?
We have several deaf churches. And among those churches are the Lutheran Church for the Deaf, the Church of Christ for the Deaf, the Catholic services which have interpreted ministries, and then Bannockburn also has interpreted ministries. There's the Baptist Deaf Church and other churches that also have interpreted ministries.
Okay, so there's a difference between the churches that have interpreted ministries, that have mostly people that hear, and the churches that are primarily with the deaf, and yours would be the example in that second category. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what are the services that you provide for the folks in your congregation?
We have some Texas School for the Deaf students who attend our congregation, and then we have deaf people from the Austin community. And we focus on these two populations, the Texas School for the Deaf and the deaf community at large in Austin. We have people who come who are parents of deaf children, and we also have hearing children of deaf parents who attend our congregation. And then we have interested hearing people throughout the community who want to work with deaf people who come to our congregation. So those are the types of people that we have in our church, and we have voice interpreters for hearing people that attend our church.
But when is a religious group's faith acceptable, and when does a group's belief turn them into a cult? These questions are very difficult to answer. Religious experts will tell you there is no clear definition of what a cult is. For most Americans, though, as of early Sunday morning, February 28th, the 70-acre farm on that hilltop behind me became a symbol of what we believe, perceive, and even fear cults to be in this country.
They see fire, but we'll see fire. Let us get their men out, and then we'll pull back.
It started when agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms stormed the so-called compound of the Branch Davidians religious sect. Following a firefight that left 4 ATF officers dead and estimates of as many as 10 religious members dead, a standoff began between both sides. The leader of the Branch Davidians is David Koresh, also known as Vernon Howell. He became the focus of the situation in Waco. Koresh has proclaimed to be a prophet, even Jesus Christ.
In keeping with this continuing coverage of social issues of paramount importance to our community, host Bishop John McCarthy of the Austin Diocese of the Roman Catholic Church interviewed Mayor Bruce Todd in mid-1994. In that same year, the pastoral services of the Salvation Army to the community were featured. And as always, the arts have found fitting expression during the Christmas season. That's when the Austin Chamber Youth Musicians were featured.
I'm happy to have you here as a mayor of what I consider one of the really great cities of North America, Austin, Texas. And I'd like to ask you if as you sit back and you're moving into a new period in your life as the leader of this city, what would be your hopes and your aspirations for Austin? If you could dream for a few minutes. I know you have to deal with power problems and garbage removal and costs and salaries and personnel and a lot of nuts and bolts logistical things, but if you wanted to just step back and think about human life shared together in a cultural center such as a great city is, what would you dream and what would you want?
You know, I think that much of being a mayor is being embroiled in those kinds of things, calls about potholes and trash pickups and electricity and where the airport is, all those kinds of issues. But when you're able to step back and reflect on what is, if you had to condense it to one word, what word would you use to describe an attribute that you'd like to see in the city that had the greatest promise for the future? And I think that one word, in my opinion, would be hope. Because it is my feeling that the lack of hope is the root of many of our problems. And that the ability to instill in people that there is a society in which they can live in this major city, and we are a major city, that can give them hope and opportunity for the future is one of the best things that we can do. Now, it has to be backed up with reality, meaning that there has to be a mechanism to improve on people's lives. Most people spend their entire lives trying to improve on it, trying to make things better. It doesn't mean, even when you retire, you want to look for a better fishing spot or something. And I think that trying, particularly among our young people, and we've had a lot of conversations about this over the last 3 years, but making sure our young people thought and believed and, in fact, had better opportunities in front of them and could hope for that better future. I think that, in and of itself, would be a way to summarize sort of the vision we need to look at for Austin.
Well, I think that we've been around a long time, as you say. I think the Army has established a kind of credibility. It is kept, for the most part, and I think this must be a miracle or a grace act from God, but for some reason or other, it's kept from a lot of political problems and divisions, and simply has tried to do its work where it is, trying to spend dollars very wisely. And we don't always accomplish what we want to do, but I think that the Army does it with a forthrightness. But I must say that I'm hesitant to brag on us too much. We really are there to serve people, and sometimes we do it well, and sometimes we don't. We do it with human hands. But I'm convinced that this organization called the Salvation Army is of God, because if it weren't, I don't think we'd be around.
For more information about these concerts or how your child can become a member of this special organization, just call this number, 454-7562. I'd like to thank our guests, Felicity Coleman, Ellie Grigsby, and Tanaya Sunbury, for joining us today. I also want to thank the other members of the Austin Chamber Music Center for sharing their special gift of music with us today. Finally, with Christmas just 5 days away, we want to wish you and your family our warmest holiday wishes from all of us who work on the Austin Faith Dialogue. And as a gift to you, we want to share one final selection of beautiful music from some very talented young people. Merry Christmas.
Turning now to the highlights of 1995, we discovered a rich mix of the arts and social issues last January when the nationally known blind musician Ken Miedema and theologian Tony Campolo were in Austin for the Let Justice Roll Conference, sponsored by Austin Metropolitan Ministries. Next, the pastoral outreach of Mother Teresa was reported by lay women from Westlake who returned to share their inspiring experience in India. And finally, the Episcopal Seminary of the Southwest served to illustrate one of the vital faith traditions of our community.
Most of my concerts, people tell me stories from the audience, and I create songs based on the stories they tell me, which is really, really fun because it becomes their program, you see. It becomes their show. They own it. They tell the story. They set the agenda for the show. And so what happens is that with my music, people feel not like we've come to see Ken Miedema. What they say is, we've come to experience ourselves. I teach sociology at a small college just outside of Philadelphia. It's a Baptist school historically, although it's now just called itself a Christian school. very, very much into social issues and social concerns. It's a strange wedding of kind of evangelical Christianity and the kind of social issues that usually evangelical Christians don't get into. We're very much into addressing the problems of world hunger and into the environment and into trying to stand up for the rights of gay and lesbian people, and we try to be the kind of school that sensitizes our students to the sufferings of people so that their personal conversion, because we have a strong emphasis on that, winning people into a personal relationship with Jesus, that is all translated into expressing itself, not in personal piety, but in social action for justice.
And that is her theology, is that when you take care of anyone suffering, whether from poverty or loneliness or whatever reason, you are taking care of the suffering Christ. And you, after coming out of a chapel, looking at those words, looking at the crucifix, reading the prayers that she has, and then when you go to do something, you really do feel like you're doing it to the suffering Christ, and it's a powerful feeling.
And you have, I believe, some other pictures of life in India and the work that you did. Here we go.
That's the leprosy. If the people don't have feet, they do handwork. If they don't have hand, they do feet work, and all the weaving throughout the world for Mother Teresa's saris and Missionaries of Charity. It's done right here, and they're paid. These are recovering lepers. There's somebody working on the sari of the Missionaries of Charity, like she wears. So you see how happy he is? It's a joyful place. They get paid to do this, and they're cured.
Hello, and welcome to the Episcopal Theological Seminary of the Southwest. In the next few minutes, you'll be introduced to the process of preparation for ministry that takes place in a very special way here at ETSS.
Worship, academics, and community are the way we define spiritual formation at the Seminary of the Southwest. The love of God and the love of learning are the key characteristics of spiritual formation in this community.
Vista workers came to town in 1995 and are performing invaluable services through Austin Metropolitan Ministries. We are going to be seeing something of that, as well as viewing an interview with AISD Trustee President Kathy Ryder on issues pertaining to the public schools and interface with the faith community. Earlier this year, Charles Moore, United Methodist pastor, spoke of the fast which he conducted that gained widespread publicity as he sought to bring about changes in that denomination's policy in regard to the ordination of gay and lesbian persons. Finally, we had an interview with Director Pebbles Wadsworth of the Performing Arts Center at the University of Texas. She revealed how the outstanding artists who come to our community are in close cooperation with the young people and the children of the churches of our vicinity.
I'm Carl Gronberg, host for the program, and with me today on the program are two young women who have come to Austin to participate in Austin Metropolitan Ministries and Vista Volunteers. Kristen Anderson is from New York State, and Molly Boehm is from, well, Illinois and Indiana. And Kristen and Molly, we welcome you to Austin, Texas.
Thank you.
And we're glad to have Vista Volunteers with us, and I thank you a lot for being on this program. You had mentioned that this is the 30th anniversary of Vista, starting back in 64, 65. Talk a little bit about the origins of this organization we know as Volunteers in Service to America. Kristen, how did it start?
Well, service has always been a part of American society, from missionaries to soldiers to, explorers. But Vista, as we know it today, sort of started roughly with the Peace Corps in 1961. In 1962, the Congress started to explore national service as an option and began doing some studies called the Gray Area Studies in northeastern cities of the state, Trenton, New Jersey, Philadelphia, New York. In 1963, the Appalachian Volunteers first went into Kentucky, and all of these things are sort of the rough edges of Vista. What started as the first concept of Vista, while it wasn't actually named Vista at the time. In 1964, with Johnson's War on Poverty, the Office of Economic Opportunity began, and that's where most of the War on Poverty programs stemmed from. And that was the original birth of Vista, Volunteers in Service to America.
What about things like the fact, though, that there's so much more in the way of drugs and gangs, and what you hear so much about on television is invading the school? And how do you respond to that kind of threat?
Well, I do think that education has changed in the sense that when I went to school in the 50s, if you did not be successful in the classroom, generally the prevailing thought was it was because the student did not learn. The student did not apply themselves and did not take responsibility. What we're seeing now is that there are many different learning styles, and we must be aware of those. We're also aware that children come to school in different levels of preparation. I expect, although I don't know Eric's family, I expect that Eric had nursery rhymes read to him. I expect that he had bedtime stories read. So Eric was at a different...
We're going to ask you to recite any of that. I appreciate it.
Eric was at a different place when he joined us in kindergarten. When you have young people who've never heard a nursery rhyme, who don't have any printed material in their home, then that means that they come at a different place. It does not mean that their capacity is different. It does not mean that...
But they don't have the same background.
They don't have the same background, and they may not have the same support at home.
Okay.
So you have to look at how do we help young people tap into their ability to learn. And part of that is a sense of well-being, a sense of self-esteem, and I think that's where you move into that holistic being. If you don't come with background help, if you come to school, as Eric said, not having anything to eat, if you come hungry, if you come not sure what clothes you're going to wear, not sure how you're going to interact with other kids.
Right. So you can't help but deal with people holistically.
I think you have to deal with people holistic, but it doesn't change the focus that our responsibility in the classroom is to help everyone reach their potential and be successful.
So I couldn't get out of it that way, and I'd preached these sermons all my life, you know, on that scripture, I forgot where it is, about give your body as a living sacrifice, which is your reasonable service. I think it's in Romans, I think Paul said it. And then I heard this voice sort of saying to me, well, all right, how about April the 27th for doing that? And I found myself saying, well, God, could you be a little less corporeally specific about that? And the voice comes back and says, I don't want your whole body, I just want about 20 pounds of it, ounce by ounce, you know, while you do this fast. And after all that, I said, all right, I'll do it. How many bottles of water do I need to stock up to drink? And so I fasted for 16 days. And the bishops sent a delegation out to talk with me, hoping, I think, that I would just call it off. This was before they made a statement. And I told them, unless you make a public statement, not just a private letter to me, unless you make a public statement, I'm not going to stop the fast. So they went back, and on the very last day, full day of their deliberations, they passed a resolution. It wasn't a great deal, but it was enough. They decried discrimination, and they said if they'd been involved in it, they were sorry. And the most significant thing they did, instead of reaffirming the official position of the church, they recognized it. Very, very important distinction. And one reporter out of his own prejudice, I suppose, not in the secular press, in the church press, changed their word, recognize, to reaffirm, which would have meant that the fast accomplished nothing, and I couldn't legitimately call it off. But I really appreciated that. That was a very serious and wise compromise. They didn't ignore the position of the church that they're supposed to defend, but they didn't affirm it either. They just said, we recognize it.
I'm going to tell you about the coming of the judgment. Very well, very well. I'm going to tell you about the coming of the judgment. Very well, very well. There's a better day coming. Very well, very well. There's a better day coming. Very well, very well. In that great in the morning. Very well, very well. In that great in the morning. Very well, very well.
Okay, give us a little feedback on that.
I'm laughing because people say to me, how do you program such a diverse thing? You must have an awful lot of knowledge about the arts. And I always laugh and say, no, what I know is who to go to, who has the best knowledge. And our program is so strong because it's very inclusive in the programming process. That is Albert McNeil Jubilee Singers. And when I lived in Los Angeles, I went to Dr. Beverly Robinson, who taught at UCLA, and said, is there a great, who's the greatest gospel group, spiritual group in the United States, because we want to put them on? And she said, honey, I'm picking you up at 8 o'clock Sunday morning, and I'm going to take you down and show you. And she took me to the local church, and there was Dr. McNeil and the Albert McNeil Jubilee Singers. We presented them at UCLA, and they were picked up right away by Columbia Artist Management, and they tour all over the world now. And they are wonderful. They will be performing in the Bass Concert Hall. They will be doing outreach in various church communities, going out to the church and working with the people in the congregations, and going out to the local high schools and working. We have yet to choose which things they're going to be doing, but they'll be here and doing that. And they're just, no matter how bad a day you've had, year you've had, if you go to that concert, you walk out saying, hallelujah.
Okay. So there you have the survey of Austin Faith Dialogue over the last 8 years with special review of our 1995 programming. I'm Sandy Wilder, hoping you have enjoyed this overview and that you enjoy Austin Faith Dialogue.
And I'm Richard Thompson, thanking you for watching today, and to KTBC TV for their cooperation in making this possible. Without them, we wouldn't be having this program. And may each of you have a peaceful and blessed new year. Good day.
For more information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-7627.